From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky visits the U.S. to pitch President Biden on a victory plan. But while the White House announces new security assistance, it does not approve long-range strikes into Russia. Plus, the Ukrainian leader steps into the November election by making an unflattering remark about JD Vance. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, editorial board member Kate Batchelder-Odell and columnist Kim Strassel. On Thursday, Joe Biden welcomed President Zelensky to the White House, saying it has been a top priority of my administration to provide Ukraine with the support it needs to prevail. Let's listen to a piece of what else the president said.
I'm proud to announce a new $2.4 billion package of security assistance. I've also directed the Pentagon to allocate all the remaining security assistance funding that has been appropriated for Ukraine, period, by the end of my term, which is January 20. And this will strengthen Ukraine's position in future negotiations.
Okay, what do we know about what the White House is announcing? And is this what President Zelensky wanted when he was coming to pitch Biden on a plan to win the war, essentially?
Well, I think there are a couple of good things here that the White House did. The White House, for one, decided to give Ukraine a new longer range munition called the Joint Standoff Weapon. That will help Ukraine strike Russian targets from further distances. So it's a valuable munition. And it underscores that for all the discussion of F-16s, one thing that matters a lot is what kind of weapon you use with them. The Biden administration also announced they'd open up 18 new pilot training spots for Ukrainian F-16 pilots. That is good news, though it is unfortunate how anemic Ukrainian pilot training has been for months. I think the Air Force is working on maybe about a dozen pilots, and 18 more doesn't say great things about our ability to train surplus pilots quickly when we need them. So there are some good measures in here, and also another Patriot battery for Ukraine, which will help them defend their cities against Russian cruise missile strikes that have been so devastating. So while you have some really good things that Ukraine needs and that are long overdue, I think there's a problem here in the larger picture in that the Biden administration is still kind of not providing enough of the relevant systems to make a real dent on the battlefield. They are still dragging their feet on letting Ukraine strike inside Russia with long-range weapons known as ATACMS. And even when Biden trumpets his draining the account of drawdown authority, where he can take weapons from the U.S. and give them to Ukraine, he's doing that right before it expires at the end of the fiscal year. And so the Biden administration is behind on where it could be giving Ukraine weapons, probably 4 to 6 months behind. Some sources on the Hill have said those weapons are going to take into 2025 to arrive. So I guess overall here, Kyle, you do have some good continued support of Ukraine, but lacking a larger picture and really continuing to be kind of slow and halting.
Meantime, President Zelensky has blundered into the United States presidential election on this trip, giving an interview to The New Yorker. He was asked about JD Vance. Zelensky said he is too radical. The reporter says Vance has come out with a plan. Zelensky says to give up our territories. The reporter says, your words, not mine, but yes, that's the gist of it. And Zelensky says his message seems to be that Ukraine must make a sacrifice. This brings us back to the question of the cost and who shoulders it. The idea that the world should end this war at Ukraine's expense is unacceptable. Here is part of what JD Vance is saying in response at a rally in Michigan.
Zelensky criticized something I said. First of all, that's not a plan. That's me talking about one possible scenario for how this thing might ultimately end. But look, I don't appreciate Zelensky coming to this country and telling the American taxpayers what they ought to do. He ought to say thank you to the American taxpayers.
Kim, what do you make of this, which strikes me as, at best, a distraction from what Zelensky was trying to accomplish with this visit to the U.S.?
Yeah, well, first of all, just to be clear, Zelensky is right. J.D. Vance is terribly misinformed and misguided on this issue, and he's using it for politicking. This is part of a wing of the Republican Party that is increasingly isolationist. They know they get an applause line when they talk about American taxpayers, and they purposely ignore big bigger questions of American strength, of our allies, of the dangers of Putin feeling emboldened by winning a victory in Ukraine. So Zelensky, what he said, I have no doubt it's his honest opinion, and it resonates with some of us. That being said, it was an unforced error. When you are a country, the leader of a country that's under attack and very reliant on the United States to be providing you weapons and support, your job is to make both sides happy. Because remember, this is not just a question of which president is in the office, but rather you have to get Congress to agree to vote on packages of aid. And Zelensky knows all too well that there has been some diminishing support for that, especially among Republicans. So to come out and criticize the running mate of the main Republican contender just wasn't very wise at all. He should have known better. I'm sure he just couldn't help himself because in addition to Congress, look, there's a very decent chance that Donald Trump might win the presidency. JD Vance is one of his advisors. And again, too, if you're trying to accomplish an aim, it's a lot better to try to get close to the team, talk to them, convince them, change their minds, modulate their positions than it is to attack them in the press, especially given that there were a couple of other unforced errors this week on Zelensky's part, too.
To that point, one of them seems to be this visit to an ammunition plant in Scranton, Pennsylvania, along with some prominent Democrats, including Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. That has prompted a letter now from Republican Speaker Mike Johnson. Here's part of what he's saying. The tour was clearly a partisan campaign event designed to help Democrats and is clearly election interference, unquote. The House Speaker asked that Zelensky fire his ambassador to the United States. Kate, there seems to be some dispute here over whether there were Republicans that were invited to this event. Johnson is saying no. Here's a piece of the Associated Press story. It says an Army official said it was standard procedure to invite House and Senate members who represent the district where such industrial plants are located. In this case, interested congressional members from the area attended. So there's some suggestion there that maybe the Republicans were invited to this event and decided not to go or had other conflicts. And honestly, I wonder how much this tour of this plant would have become a flashpoint had Zelensky not made those remarks to the New Yorker that then got all this sort of attention on his visit to the United States and whether there was any partisan valence to it. But Kate, what do you make of this? And part of the concern, I think, for people who support helping Ukraine defend itself from this Russian invasion by Vladimir Putin is that the more that it takes on a partisan tenor, the more that there's a self-reinforcing kind of feedback loop where if Republicans start to see helping Ukraine as a democratic issue, then there's less support in a Congress where we still have a split control of the House and the Senate, and we have a Senate filibuster that requires 60 votes to get a lot of things done.
I definitely think it was unwise for Zelensky to appear at really any event that's only represented by one party. And here's kind of my thinking on it. The Ukraine supplemental package was stalled in Congress and struggling to gain support. That package, I don't think gets through Congress and without Speaker Mike Johnson showing a lot of courage and standing up to the skeptics in his own right flank and saying, we're going to pass the Ukraine bill. This is a live fire exercise. What happens in Ukraine matters, and whether the U.S. continues to lead on the world matters. And those points aren't entirely popular in precincts of his own party. So I think it does look unfortunate and ungrateful to then lend any sort of credence to any idea that Ukraine is a purely democratic cause, because there have been a lot of Republicans who have stuck out their neck to support Ukraine funding, even as it becomes more unpopular. And, the Ukraine funding that exists now will eventually run out after the election at some point. And so you can't keep coming back to Congress and expecting bipartisan support if it becomes a Democratic issue. And then just quickly on the merits, I think it would be very unwise for Ukraine to cast its lots with the Democrats on the merits. Right now, there is Democratic fervor support of Ukraine, but it comes from a lot of the same ideological factions that oppose Vietnam, that tend to be progressive. There's nothing that requires the Democratic Party to continue to support Ukraine. And we don't know what Kamala Harris really thinks about Ukraine and how she might handle it. So Ukraine's best bet on the merits is to continue to build bipartisan support and try to persuade Trump that defending Ukraine is consistent with his own peace through strength view of the world, his own view of deterring bad actors, instead of these potshots in the press that I think are pretty destructive.
Hang tight. We'll be right back in a moment. Welcome back. Well, Zelensky's intrusion into the presidential campaign clearly provoked President Trump. He was at a Georgia rally on Tuesday. He said every time Zelensky comes to the United States, he walks away with $100 billion. I think he's the greatest salesman on earth. Classic kind of Trumpian rhetoric. But today, now, President Zelensky visited Donald Trump at Trump Tower in New York. Trump said it was an honor to meet with him. Zelensky said he hopes they continue to have good relations. Here is part of what President Trump said then after the meeting concluded.
Well, I learned a lot, but I think I haven't changed from the standpoint that we both want to see this end and we both want to see a fair deal made. And it's got to be fair. And I think that'll happen at the right time. I think it's going to happen. The president wants it to end, and he wants it to end as quickly as possible. He wants a fair transaction to take place. And I think, right now I'm campaigning. So right now I don't have much to do with it other than we're doing very well in terms of the campaign. And I've been saying that I believe if I win, we're going to have a very fair and I think actually rather rapid deal.
Kim, I would love to be a fly on the wall in that meeting because these are the kinds of things that President Trump is saying on the campaign trail. He repeated himself today that he will get this deal done, fair to both sides, even before he takes office on January 20, 2025, if he wins the presidential election. And I can only imagine that Zelensky in private is asking what many voters, what many members of the public are probably wondering, which is what does President Trump mean by that exactly? I saw President Trump in Pennsylvania this week at a rally. He was repeating the same kinds of things, saying it's crazy what's happening. We need to get together, both sides, and make some sort of agreement. But there is very little detail, as far as I can tell, about what he exactly means by that and what kind of pressure he is willing to exert on Ukraine and or on Russia to get them to the bargaining table.
This goes to my point about how it's always more beneficial to meet with a campaign, talk with them, rather than lambast them in the press. I think it makes it a little bit harder for Donald Trump to be as radical as he finds it easy to be at times, having sat down with Zelensky, heard about the things, being expected to be serious about this and understand the plight of the Ukrainian people better from someone who's been out there on the front lines of it. What does he mean by it? Who knows? Look, he just says this stuff. At least he's modulated slightly from this would never have happened if I'd have been in office. And now he's talking a bit about the next stages. He obviously does what we do know, and I think it's a bit concerning, and he said it right there again, is he wants it to be done rapidly. What's concerning to me about that is that at the moment, Ukraine is not necessarily on the front foot. The Biden administration is giving it some more things that it needs. But for Ukraine to have an ending to this that is remotely acceptable to the Ukrainian people, and in my mind, it should be remotely acceptable to the countries that have supported Ukraine and recognized Russian aggression, it's going to have to be in a forward posture. It's going to have to be slightly on the advance and it have the upper hand so that it can demand things of Putin. Because what we know is that Putin right now has no incentive to stop. He can just keep throwing his cannon fodder convicts that he takes out of the prisons and conscripts that he requires to go into his military and throw them out there there and keep this at a draw, because we know that the only thing that will make him happy in the end is if he keeps all of the territory he has at the moment. And what's concerning, I think, about those Trump's comments is that when he first came out, he said, we want this to be fair. Then he said, we want this to be fair to everybody. Well, why exactly? There's one aggressor here and there's one victim. The fairness really needs to be on the side of the Ukrainians and what they decide is acceptable in the end. And that's the frustrating part, is Donald Trump knows that were he to become president, he'd have a lot of sway over money, munitions, and the ability to help or hinder Ukraine. And I think it's going to be one of the biggest first issues that he confronts if he's president. But I think Zelensky still has some work to do there to bring him around to the notion that things on the ground might need to change a bit before there is any talk of a settlement.